One of the greatest desires that I have as a pastor-teacher is to study and to teach. I know that there are other priorities that you can throw in there, but studying, teaching is what satisfies me the most. And having a conference like this is, to me, it's like music in my ears. We're here the whole day, taking in the Word. I mean, it doesn't get any better than this. Seeing old friends that get older than you, it doesn't get any better than this. But something is taking place in the Pacific Northwest that is of a lot of interest to me. And Tanny Sisson is involved in this. And that is of having 1- and 2-day clinics in one book of the Bible. And they've done this now several times here in the state of Washington, as well as, I should say, Hugh Crowder has also been involved in that. And what they've been doing is that they've been having like a clinic for one day for Romans chapters 1 through 8. And you start in the morning, and you start teaching. When that teacher gets tired, the next guy steps in. Well, maybe there's a little break in between. And you just go chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3, chapter 4. First 8 chapters of the book of Romans. Then everybody gets a rest for a little while. Then they come in and they did chapters 9 through 16. That's fantastic if you ask me. Don't you think it'd be great to be able to go through like the book of Ephesians in a sitting? I mean, what greater treat could you possibly enjoy than to go through Ephesians or Colossians, Galatians in one sitting? Now, true, you're going to get tired, you're going to get a certain amount of brain burn, but it's when you get that brain burn when you really learn. I'd like for Tanny to come and to explain to us how it is that it's been taking place, and then afterwards if you'll announce our question and answer session.
Thank you. So, Ron...
You got to put this around your back.
Thank you. Ron McMurray was informing me earlier that my section had been shortened for the sake of time. And he doesn't know how much power he has, because I've got 15 minutes to do this. But no, Ron, you can relax. I'd already talked to Jesse about this. I want to straighten out some wrinkles in Jesse's explanation, because it's not all in one day. That probably is a little bit of a shock to you, but I'll get into that in a couple minutes. So I'm listening today at all the speakers, and Jesse, I just appreciate so much what you've done each year. Today's lineup, you can see the progression, the foundation of Scripture, and building up and filling in the details and application in the lives of people who are hurting. And as far as hurting, I was thinking this morning, well, I need to go back and give a report to the people back home as to what took place today. And so I'm writing things down, right? You remember one of the first illustrations that Paul Schmidlacker gave this morning? It had to do with buzzards. It had to do with eating roadkill. Now, this is after 2 days when I was the object of appreciation. It was Employee Appreciation Day for us at work. And so we had these luncheon meats that were left for us. And but there was something in the luncheon meat that really didn't do us much good. So I was sick to my stomach, and now here is Paul talking about buzzards eating roadkill and enjoying it. So then from there, where does it go? He starts talking about death, and then it moves on to Jonathan, rapists, killers, people on meth and heroin, drugs, and then landslides, and then ranting and raving and crying and violent outbursts, and stupid people. That was Ron talking about some of these folks. And so I get to give them that message. Well, they wouldn't feel free to laugh because I deliberately gave you just part of the message. The other part of the message, I was really impressed because, I as I listened to Paul and I listened to Will, you notice that a significant number of the verses came from the book of Romans that they talked about as a foundation for a lot of the theology and principles that we were given today. And so for me, the book of Romans is really important. I figure it was important for Dr. Barnhouse. Is it Dr. Barnhouse? But it was important enough for him to write 4 volumes on the one book. And for me, it's important. For a long time, there were things that I wanted to make sense out of in the book of Romans because I knew that in that book, Paul had presented a basic skeleton for his thinking and his theology. And there were things in there that throughout the years and all the teaching that I had received from various folks, various people that I admire and respect very, very deeply, there were doctrines that I had been taught that seemed disconnected. And I knew that somewhere in the book of Romans, Paul had presented it in a way that made sense. At least it made sense to him. It didn't make sense to me. And so in 2012, September, Todd Kennedy had his regular Spokane Bible Church conference. And I was there, and I think Ron, you and your wife were there, and some others were there. Also, Brett Nasworth was there. He is the president of Disciple Makers Multiplied, DM2 USA. And he had a burden to reach out to people, to go into various countries and to give them teaching that they could take. And he knew that the places that he was going to, he wasn't going to be able to stay there a long time. And what he wanted to do was to fulfill 2 Timothy 2:2. And the idea in Paul's thinking with regard to that was to take faithful men and to teach them doctrine so that they could pass it on to others. And this was Brett's idea, and he was talking to Clay Ward, who is pastor of Pleroma Bible Church in Tullahoma, Tennessee. And they put some materials together that had to do with a survey of the Old Testament, and then they started working on Romans 1 through 8. And at that conference, Brett made the presentation. And by this time, what they had already done was they had gone to Sierra Leone, they had gone to Bolivia. Actually, what Brett did was he took 5 other guys with him, and when they went to Sierra Leone, Brett and Clay went there, and they would tag team teach. And they didn't actually talk until they couldn't talk anymore. What they did was they did 45 to 50-minute sections, and they took turns. And so the more teachers they had, the less difficult it was, the less rigorous it was. And so my thinking was, as far as their description was concerned, I thought, that's a really good idea to have a bunch of men. It would be like a conference like today. You have different personalities teaching it, so that if you have different personalities sitting out there, they receive teaching better from certain kinds of teachers than other kinds. It keeps things moving. Now, the other thing that they did was they have a workbook, and the workbook had their notes with blanks where words are left out. So what they did was they have a workbook, and we would be filling this out as students. We would be filling it out as the teaching is being done. using this method and a PowerPoint presentation, having the notes out and with the blanks filled in up on the projector, was really helpful in keeping people's attention. You never got sleepy, and you may get tired, but you were able to sit through. Now, I had decided to go to Tullahoma to sit through. It was 3 days going through Romans 1 through 8. Okay, 3 days, and you began at 8 o'clock, and you were done at 9. And you had a couple of meals in between, and everybody stayed in the same building for the meals. But it was a good time of fellowship and camaraderie and asking questions. Once I was done, I was thinking, I now have this workbook that I could study, that I could present to somebody else with their blank workbook, and to present it to them. And I knew I had to study. And I knew that there were certain parts where I was weaker on as far as the book of Romans was concerned. There were certain parts that I felt like I needed to spend more time focusing on. So what I did was I went home and I started teaching my family, the 2 dogs, and sometimes the cat would sit in there. There's always someone negative in the group. So... But, we kept on doing it. I did it in 30-minute sections every day. And you can ask Kenneth, but he sat through that, but he's also sat through the whole day session where you sat in and took notes for the whole day. And he'll tell you that both ways are good ways for presenting the materials. Now, what this does is... I was thinking, I knew a lot of people who had received a lot of teaching and had potential to get out there and pass out a whole lot of truth, a whole lot of doctrine. But what they just needed is a tool that didn't make them feel so naked and feeling afraid that they might say the wrong thing. And this, I think, was an extremely helpful thing. Well, what Brett had done was he had done it throughout in other countries. He was encouraged to do it in churches in the United States. And so he's been doing it in the United States. It was presented in Spokane once again. And Mark Musser and his daughter happened to be there, and this was at the urging of his daughter Rachel. I helped teach Romans 1 through 8 in Spokane, and after we were done, Mark said Rachel would like to do this in Olympia because she thinks her high school friends need this. And so I helped teach, and also Hugh helped teach the folks down there in Olympia. And then Rachel and her friends have taken it out to their friends, and they're presenting the materials. The book of Romans, the book that presents God's gospel of salvation, where you see the majesty of God's grace against the background of the ugliness and the fallenness of man. To have that in people's hands and to be able to see that, it's not just because this guy is teaching this theology. It's because Paul was actually thinking this way. And you see his pattern of thinking, not only in its details, because, I brought one guy to Spokane, and when we went through Romans chapter 1 through chapter 3, verse 20, he felt horrible. In fact, by the time that section was done, he was walking outside, and I'm looking at it, and I'm thinking, there's something going wrong. He was utterly devastated because what you were seeing in that section is the utter depravity of every single member of the human race, and you can't get around that. You're totally without hope, and there's nothing you can do to save yourself, and no member of the human race can save you, but God sent his Son. And see that last part, he hadn't gotten it yet, because we stopped right there. And I said to him, you got to hang on, because that's not the whole story. You got to hear the rest of the story. And when he hears the rest of the story, he goes from the depths of darkness, because he sees himself for the ugliness of who he is, just like every single one of us have, and our utter need for the salvation that only God can provide. So this free gift that God makes available to each one of us begins at in the next section. There's justification, and then there's sanctification and glorification, moving on. So anyways, I'm just excited about this. We are going, Hugh and I have already been talking about doing Romans 9 through 16, probably in a different way than we've been doing it at Lakeland, because I've been teaching it in 1-hour sections in the past several months. And what we'd like to do is use one whole day chunks so that we can have more concentrated teaching in a short amount of time. Okay? I don't want to abuse the opportunity for us to ask questions, so I'm going to stop there, Jesse, if you want to, unless you want to give me more time.
Well, maybe we can ask you some questions about this, the way that this thing is programmed.
Oh, sure.
You said that Mark's daughter, Rachel, then took it out to her friends?
Yeah.
School friends?
Yeah, so
what
she...
was the reception like? Didn't they think it was kind of stuffy?
No, the way it's written, Brett loves to teach teenagers and college-level folks. And so he has had experience internationally in South America and also here in the United States. So he's able to put sentences together in a way that's easy to receive and acceptable, and even the young folks were willing to receive it. Let's ask Kenneth. I don't want to put you on the spot, but is it stuffy?
No.
Christian girlfriends of hers in school?
These are friends from other churches who haven't received much teaching.
Okay, great.
Yeah. Yeah, and the teaching in the book of Romans, the content is deeper than what I think a lot of the churches are giving out today.
Any teaching is deeper than life.
Yeah. So now, as far as how can you may be thinking, how can you be involved? I would appreciate your prayers for these men who are going out to other countries and presenting these materials. There's a group that Mark Musser has just taken to Ukraine, and they have gone to 2 or 3 cities presenting these materials. Mark convinced Brett to go to Myanmar. And the interesting thing about Myanmar is that there's a lot of conflict going on there, but the conflict is between militant Buddhists. Can you imagine? That's almost an oxymoron. Militant Buddhists and Muslims. And the thing about the conflict between those two groups is they don't bother the Christians as a result. And what that has done is it has opened the door for missionaries to go in and have more teaching available to them. Now, I know some men now who are planning on going over there here pretty soon. One of them recently had a stroke, and I'm still not sure what his condition is. But it's stuff like that can happen, and things can get in the way, and there is a real conflict with regard to this. And the conflict is more angelic, I think, because the majesty of God's grace is being presented.
Can you maybe elucidate a little bit about how this method of teaching differs from your regular Sunday school curriculum, where kids have to fill out blanks in books?
I think the advantage to this method is you not only have the general overview and the cohesive message of Romans 1 through 8, but you also see how the details relate to the whole overview. The difficulty that I've had with past teaching with regard to Romans is that you'll get bits and pieces, but it's hard to figure out how do they connect. And so you get a disjointed understanding. But when I read it, there are things there that I know Paul intended for us to make those connections. And it's critical as far as those connections are concerned that we understand the relationship between these truths and these doctrines. And that's what's helpful for it. The difficulty with doing it in in weekly 1-hour sections is you're having to review all the time. I find this method doing whole day sections where you're covering a whole bunch of stuff, I think more efficient. And I can come back, the next morning and say, we've gone over these sections that had to do with the condemnation of the entire human race. And now we're beginning to see what the answers are. And now that we have the answers, many of the answers related to the penalty of sin, then we're going to see how to deal with the presence of sin and how to deal with the power of sin. And God has provided solutions for it all. And when you see how all that relates, then the impact of it is profound, extremely profound.
Yeah, as you know, most of us have been trained under the concept of just a straight lecture method with little to no interaction with the audience.
Mm-hmm.
Is there interaction with your
Yeah,
audience?
there's opportunities to ask questions, and you can set it up any way. Well, there's a lot of freedom in setting it up. Depending on the situation, if you are just an individual teaching somebody one-on-one, that's one method. If you're teaching a small group, that's another method. So how you use it is really left in your hands. The other issue too is the schedule can be set up so that there's opportunities for as much interaction as allows the teaching to continue moving. Because in 3 days, you're covering a whole lot of materials. You end up with almost 100 pages of notes. There have been, I think, a lot of the questions that might come to mind. It's been used frequently enough that they've been able to incorporate many of the questions that come to people's minds as they're receiving the teaching.
Tanny,
Bob?
are there prerequisites for each session? Is there homework that, like Rachel's friends had to do before they started this, or did
No.
they just get it?
You just have to be willing. Now, when we did it in Tullahoma, I know that they had invited. This is one of the first sessions they had taught on the Book of Romans, and the original intent was to find believers who already had some teaching under their belt, and to give them a tool with this workshop so that they can go out and teach others. There were actually unbelievers at this workshop that I went to. And so what they did was, before I arrived to have the Roman series, the principles that are related to salvation, and it's actually an appendix of the Romans 1 through 8 workbook. You can be an unbeliever and you can be present there and be taking notes, and what's really cool about that is you're learning the concept of salvation from the book of Romans itself, and not just a few verses. You get the whole flow of thought that Paul used in an extended way. Yes.
You're planning to do this for other books club?
Yes. So right now they have the Old Testament survey, and they're also putting together a New Testament survey, so that other New Testament books are being worked on. There is a study on the book of Hebrews that Mark Musser is starting and trying to put together, and they're still under. There's editorial work that's being done on that, and 1 Corinthians also is being completed soon.
Life of Christ.
Yeah, and that's right, the most important thing. There's also a Life of Christ series that's being taught.
You're going to have the notes on a website somewhere?
Well, what we do is for the people who go through the workshop, we make available all of the PowerPoint slides, all of the teacher's edition, so that you can go out and present it to others, as well as the student's edition, so that you can make copies of the blanks. And what I did was I just took it to Office Depot and asked them to put it together. So, but we like to have the people go through the workshop before the materials are made available to them, so that the notes, if there's any questions or differences in perspective, it's clearly understood before they go out and teach it. Okay, so please pray if you're interested in getting involved in this. Let's see. I can give you the organization website address. It's dm2usa.org. Or you can contact me. My email address is sisonnc@gmail.com. So, no more questions? Yes.
How do I ask this? Are you familiar with R.P. Thieng's teaching on Romans?
I am. Well, not his teaching on Romans, but I was in Houston for 5 years.
Oh, okay. I've gone through chapter 14, and it's like over 400 and some lessons. How does this, and I'm just curious, how does that compare to what they're teaching on Romans? Is it a little more practical? I know Thiem is really deep.
Yeah, it was, his tendency is to be really technical. This doesn't spend so much time with the languages with each verse, but when the languages are critical for the passage, it is brought up, and from what I see, it's not deep Greek. The issues that are brought
and I know
up.
that doesn't have to be important.
Yeah.
It's important, but it's not essential. That's what I'm
Right.
saying.
Yeah, what we're looking for are students who have had teaching, who have not necessarily gone to seminary. What we're looking for are people who are willing to be used to pass on what they've learned.
Sounds good.
Okay?
So when's your next workshop?
I need to talk to Mark. It depends on what churches are interested in when we can set it up. So if there's a church that's interested, here's Mark's vision. He would like the book of Romans 1 through 8 at least presented throughout the state of Washington. That's his vision for the next few years. That's what he'd like to do. He's right now thinking about that, but also thinking about Ukraine, and so he's back and forth. But what he'd like is for several men, some of you even, who would be willing to come together to go to churches in this state and take 3 days and be able to present it. That's what he would like. And, it doesn't have to be the same few men. You just have to be willing to learn, to be willing to be used by the Lord. Because in the times when you're not teaching, you get to learn too. You get to be reinforced. And after having gone through it 3 times, I had an opportunity to go to Houston. After I did Spokane, then I did Olympia, and then we went to Houston to present it at a church there. I was thinking, man, there's a lot of questions that keep coming up in my mind. I continue to grow in my learning of this, but at the same time, there are certain things here that become more solid that in having gone through this exercise have strengthened me spiritually, and it really changes your perspective when you understand how utterly complete is God's grace provision. Utterly complete. And you can hear those words, and you might think, well, that's true. But when you understand it more fully, how complete, how comprehensive is God's provision, it changes your perspective on everything else. And it really affects the decisions that you make. Other questions?
Well, I think I've got maybe one comment. I don't know if I'm speaking for everybody or not, but one of the things that would make us maybe a little reluctant to imbibe of this particular way of teaching is that we're not sure what's in those lessons, and we wouldn't be sure as to whether they would contradict the teachings or the doctrines that we've already taught.
Right.
And so I think that's one of the things that we want to look at more carefully and see how it's done. Otherwise, what we're doing is we're just simply going to be parroting Mark's interpretation of Romans or of Hebrews.
Mm-hmm.
And as pastors, we were cut out of a different cloth than just to be followers.
Right. And go ahead.
I think that the best way to introduce someone to it is to have them sit through a seminar, and we've got a workshop coming up, and you don't have to sit through the whole thing to begin to get the gist and flow of how it goes. But it would be nice to sit through, for instance, the Romans 1 through 8. We had new pastors sitting in Spokane through the life of Christ, and they all went away satisfied. I mean, we haven't had any problems in our doctrinal controversies at all. You need to see it happen and what happens with the audience.
Yeah.
And I think
And
that would be an important way to do it.
Jesse, I've talked to Brett, and I'm comfortable with this. I don't like going into a church and then presenting materials that the pastor he doesn't know what's going to come up. And I don't have a problem sending the teacher's edition to the pastor or the pastors who might be hosting something like this, so that you can review and still be responsible for what the congregation's exposed to. RD?
Was this designed for pastoral use more, or was it designed more for individuals to do discipling?
It had. Well, let me back up and maybe talk about what Brett does. Brett was a missionary in. Let's see. He was in Brazil, and with the Yanomamo tribe, and having gone there, he was trained with New Tribes missions, and having gone there, what he really wanted was to have something that had flexibility, that was a good tool, not only to do group presentations, but also that can be used one-on-one. And the materials are not so technical that lay people who've had significant who've been exposed to it can teach. But you can also, the way Brett has done it is, if he has someone who hasn't had a whole lot of teaching, he'll give them a section that doesn't have a whole lot of more technical information, but has they can follow the outline pretty closely, and they will just have presented the information, but they could also use illustrations from their own lives to help explain the content that's there, and that's the contribution that they can make. So the person who is trying to get a group together ends up being the helper of others, so there's a certain level of mentoring associated with that too. When I first started doing this, Brett said, just if you have any questions regarding any of the things that are taught in the book, just call me. Whether it's a question where you need more information on, or a question with regard to particular illustration, or a difference in perspective that you might have. And we want to be able to do that. We want to be able to discuss different views so that people understand where this perspective comes from. This is dispensational. Brett's background is dispensational in his perspective, and he's been around the same circles that we've been.
Any more questions? Questions?
You said you would provide someone that would like to teach this, the book?
I'm willing to provide the information to the pastor that might be interested in hosting something like this or participating in this.
The reason I ask is because my wife introduced a book called Creation, a Sunday school material,
Mm-hmm.
and we saw a video and it was really good, the video. But after we started studying the lessons, it kind of contradicted some of the things we kind of believe in. So
Mm-hmm.
I'm with Jesse. I would love to present this in our area in Wenatchee, because I like things that are, not so technical that you lose people.
Yeah. Well, what I can do is, I think the best thing for yourself is, if you can sit in on a class, and it doesn't have to be a whole day like Hugh mentioned. That's one way you can do it. Then you can see, and I'm comfortable talking to.
Where's the next class?
Well, we don't have one planned yet. That's something I still need to talk to some of the guys here who are in the area. Right now, they're coming back from Ukraine, and I want to see how they are after having done that, and see what we can plan on in the next few months. Yeah, the best thing is if you want to email me, if you're still interested, and I can contact your pastor. Really, if you want to talk to him first, that's really the best way, and let him know.
Yeah,
Then
pretty good. He went on a recommendation for this other. What is your email again?
S as in Sam, I, S as in Sam, O, N, N, C, @gmail.com. Okay.